It's a great pleasure to welcome up our panel. We have our moderator tonight, Isaiah Simon, the co-president of AACS, and he'll be joined by the star of the film, Ving Rhames, the screenwriter, Gregory Poirier. We have the sound editors, Bobbi Banks and Gregory Hedgepath, and we have editor Bruce Cannon joining us for his second panel. So thank you all so much for coming out tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I just want to say thank you to all of our guests for joining us today. Can we please give them a round of applause? Wow. Okay. So I'm sure we can all, agree that that movie was very, very intense and, often difficult to watch. I just want to get from your guys' perspective, looking back at it, 30 years from now, how do you feel about it? Does it bring back, certain feelings, memories? Can you guys just share your thoughts?
Well, for me, I couldn't watch it again, so I decided to wait until question and answer. But especially since John Singleton's passing away, just thinking about it, because I just got back in town yesterday, it brought up memories about John for me. And then it brought up some memories because quite a few of the extras in the movie were relatives of people in Rosewood. So it really, hit a lot of emotional notes and made me think about things with John. Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry. Testing 1, 2, yeah. So it really brought up, past memories with John, the process he had with us as actors, in the kind of energy that he created on the film set. So he was a little, John had his own ways of working, and everybody really respected him, and really everyone got along well. But to me, he just left some, like, I was thinking about my last time talking to him and things like that. So, I just feel very fortunate, very blessed to be a part of this, And I honestly, his mother cast me in this. Yeah. And she told me that because I was pretty much an unknown actor then, and they were talking to, like Wesley and Denzel and all those guys, and she said I'm more of the old-fashioned black man. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to echo what he said. It's emotional on a lot of levels to watch that because it's the first time I've seen it since John passed. I'm Greg, by the way. I'm the writer. But it brought up a lot of the feelings that I had on his passing to watch it again, because we had such a great collaboration. And the thing that I always loved about him, and you talked about him having his own way of working, the thing that I always loved about him the most was that man just absolutely loved film. He loved movies. And, half the time I spent with him was him getting out his laser discs and saying, look at this sound cue. Can you believe this sound cue in this old movie from blah, 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 and just stuff like that. And he was just passionate about all that stuff. And so working on the script with him was a real education in a lot of ways. It was a collaboration, but it was an education too. And I also thought about the last time that I saw him and, how enthusiastic. I hadn't seen him in years, and he just jumped up off of his chair and said, "Yeah, how are you?" Threw his arms around me. That's the kind of guy he was. But it also just brought home for me, the movie itself, putting the relationship with John aside, the intensity of it. Watching it from the back of the room there, I haven't seen it in a long time, and it's still so incredibly intense, and unfortunately, it's still so incredibly timely. you know, and that's the thing that that really occurred to me when he passed, was how little we have progressed in the 25 years since we made that film, you know, and I thought about the survivors too, because there were a lot of them alive still when we made the movie. Interestingly enough, there were several of them that we interviewed, and by the time the movie came out, they had all passed. We hit it just right on time, you know. Yeah.
One actor, I forgot what he played, Baja Jola, and he since passed away. He was relatives of some of the people who were extras from Rosewood. So that was, you know, that was kind of like, it got very emotional, and even, you know, I remember talking to him, like him not being able even to believe this happened. So you had stuff with Black Wall Street and the Oklahoma thing, what have you. So it just touched a lot of chords for everybody on the set.
Yeah. Thank you. Bobbi?
For me, I haven't seen it since we worked on it, and you know, my relationship with John is that Greg and I worked on every film except for Boys, and so I'm just so honored, you know, to be a part of it and to be a part of this panel and just talk a little bit about the experience. And John is just so creative, and just working with him, just you gain so much insight into how to take the moviegoer and have them be enveloped by what's going on. His creativity is beyond, you know, anything I can really imagine. This particular film, I'm sitting here watching, I was like, man, we did a lot of work. Sound-wise, we just did. All of the scenes where you see crowds and them just walking, you know, and the lynching and all of that we did in group. We had to re-record, you know, all of the actors again. When they take him out of the house and they're all of that whole scene, everybody, we had to redo every actor. Because John just wanted everything to be real, so he didn't care who was overlapping one another. So I don't care. And so we had to recreate everything. And so the beauty of it all is that you guys hopefully didn't know that we had to redo everything, because it's not supposed to feel that way. It's not supposed to look that way. It's not supposed to sound that way. You know, I just, you know, it's a little hard for me to talk about it. But there's one, if you don't mind, there's a scene where he says, "I've got your watch, Sam. I've got your watch." Mm-hmm. So the group actors that particular day were all white, except for the lead guy who was running the group was African American that day. So when we got to that scene, I asked him to please leave the room, so that when the rest of the actors, they could not have him in the room, because I thought that was going to be very difficult for them to see him and for him to experience what they had to produce, so much venom that wasn't about them. You know, they weren't like that. Yeah. And so after we did a few scenes, they were so emotional. They had to pour out so much hate that a couple of them physically got sick. And you could hear a pin drop. I mean, that's, you know, and that's what John, you know, he just drew out of everybody. The scenes just draw that out of you. So sure.
Thank you.
I worked with John, you know, from the beginning, from Boys to his last film, and this is definitely was the most intense experience. I think John knew this was the most important film he made, and he took this very seriously. In the last, when we ran Higher Learning, we talked a lot about John was very intentional. He thought out every detail, and like you were saying, he studied every film. Every time I saw him, he had a different DVD. But even on this film, I think I saw him reach his maturity, in the sense that he did a lot of like mini masters where he wouldn't cut, but he'd go from one character to another, and there was a lot of choreography within the shots. And like John said, I got this from Steven Spielberg. I learned this from him. And then he'd tell me about Sunrise by Murnau, and an old film worth going back to see, a silent film, and where the camera was always moving. And John studied that, and Max Ophuls. I mean, John was a library of film knowledge, and
He actually bought me a stack of books about movies, said, read these books.
Let's see what else I was going to say about that. I will also say that I was in a lot of meetings with John early on, from pre-production to post-production with the studio. And I'm just going to be blunt and say that John Peters, the producer, and the head of Warner Brothers that time, what was his name? No, Lorenzo de Ventura. They promised this film. We don't know this is a hard film. We will get this out there. We will promote this film to the end of the earth. We know it's important, John. And as soon as the film was done, man, they got cold feet and developed bone spurs. They just dropped it. They were scared of it. They were afraid of it. And I'll even mention like a couple small things. Like there was a scene, I think it was in front of Mr. Wright's store, where there was a lynching and they were cutting the ear off. And they cut the ear off. We had a close-up, and John really wanted that close-up. It really accentuated it and made it more powerful. In the studio, they just drew the line in the sand there. And I think it would have made that moment even more powerful. I know it was gory. John knew it was a hard film for an audience. But with the right promotion, with the right studio, I think they could have made this film much more successful and more people seeing it. And lastly, I'll say, I think the fact that the film wasn't given that fair chance, it really changed the direction of filmmaking for John. I mean, he went on to do great stuff, but I think he would have made a lot more serious, powerful, dramatic, maybe political films if this film was given that chance. I had to get that off my chest.
Thank you.
Greg, were you going to say something?
It's all right.
Oh,
Go,
okay.
man.
Well, for me, I'm Greg Hedgepath, sound supervisor. And for me, watching this film again, it's almost like watching a new film. I'm appreciating so many more things. Like Bruce's, your editing, man, this is a masterclass in editing. It's amazing. And Ving, your acting, I think I didn't appreciate it at the time. I mean, I knew it was good, but the emotional intensity really hit me. Yeah. And there's one scene where you're talking to Scrappy, and I don't. There may be a reverse angle, but she says something, and then your shoulders go down, and your whole countenance changes. And I was thinking, man, I wonder what conversation would you have had with John for that moment, or was that just from you? I don't know if you remember that.
I think it's important.
Can you use the mic?
I think it's important. Oh, yeah, sorry. No, I think it's important. John was very good at casting and finding chemistry with people.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes when you have that, a lot of things happen organically. And so if you trust the other actor, which, pretty much everybody trusted each other, I think some good work can come from it. But I think that, I think Hollywood has a hard time looking at what Americans did to Americans, so, and that's why I think they, as he was talking about, how, some of the stuff, the shot that they didn't want or whatever, and John wanted it, and I know John fought against the studios, quite a bit, but, and I'll say this, I think this is kind of analogous. It was like when I used to audition, one time a person not of my culture said, "Can you make it more black?" Okay. Now, maybe one of y'all can tell me what it means. I grew up in the ghetto in Harlem, dirt poor and what have you, but to this person from another culture, I wasn't black enough. So, and I think sometimes people may mean well, but they just don't really understand not only the plight of a artist or the plight of a woman, what have you, and they come up with what they think, which may be very different than my experience as a black man in America. And I think in Hollywood, let's even take the Native American. Were there any Native Americans writing scripts that had negative images of Native Americans? No, it was someone from another culture using what they thought the Native American was. So for me now, I'm kind of like a lot of producers want to meet for dinner and lunch and what have you. I don't do that anymore because I realize that most people don't know enough about my culture to really fully relate to me. And sometimes I have to explain stuff that I've experienced about being a black man in America, but I don't have the time now, So I don't have the time, and so, I pray for them, what have you, but I'm a little more, let's say, argumentative, or I don't have as much time for your lack of doing any study on this culture or that culture or that culture. So, I'm kind of, and Paul Benjamin, he's an actor, he's in the movie, he passed away, but he was saying as he got older, like he said, Ving, I'm at a point now where I can say F you to these folks. So, and he was sitting next to two agents when he said it to me. So, I'm any actors in here? Okay. Well, you'll see.
Thank you.
So to answer the rest of your question, one thing I will say is that this is probably one of the hardest films I've ever worked on because there was so much in it, and because it was John Singleton, and John was such a sound geek that it had to be right. And he on this film he started saying to me, Greg, I want to use every input in the board. And what we did is we had to bring in 3 other soundboards, and our effects mixer, Elliot, had a console in front of him, one here that they rolled in, one here, one in back of him, and he was like mixing like this, and he'd have to move the console out of the way to go to the bathroom or whatever. But it was really intense and a lot harder to do this kind of movie back then than it is now, where everything's digital and can be done in a computer. For example, like when they were in the carrier house and all the bullets are flying around. Well, back when these kind of films were being done, a mixer would have like one input with one bullet by, and he'd have to pan it, and then he'd have to go back and pan the next one. Well, we'd still be mixing this movie with all the bullets. So I had the engineering people put surround speakers in the editing rooms of the TV mixers, and because the TV editors, and because they were down for anything, they were happy to be working on a feature. They were like actually panning it inside their editing system by putting the same bullet on 4 tracks and then dissolving between each one to get it to fly around, and doing that and getting the fire. Even the fire stands up to this day because I just had great editors and people who were just really down for this film. And John, because John was such a friendly person and such a force that once they met him, they were like, whatever you want, and they would just do it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, you can.
I was gonna riff off what he said about what a difficult film it is to watch, and John was aware of that from the jump. Before we had written a word, and we had a lot of conversations about it. And one of the things that we talked a lot about was trying to find a familiar structure, a familiar Hollywood structure that people could sort of glom onto in order to guide them through this very difficult thing. And the thing that we landed on was the sort of man with no name who rides into town, and we did that deliberately. We did that
Classic Western.
Yeah.
Classic Western.
Yeah, we did that deliberately so that the audience would have something that made them comfortable, something familiar to hang on to as they went through this rather difficult thing. And the second thing about that, and you talked about the lack of promotion and all that kind of stuff, and this has stuck with me all these years. I think the moment that John realized this was going that direction was we were in a test screening, and he and I were sitting in the back. And we got about an hour into the film, and this whole row of older white people got up and walked out, right? And John leaned over to me and he said, "There goes the Academy." And that was very prophetic, I think, you know.
I had a question about the pre-production process for this film. I know, this was your first script that got produced. So I was just wondering what drew you to write this script? And then for everyone else, what drew you to want to work on this script with John? And what do you think also drew... Sorry, my bad, Mr. Singleton. What do you think drew him to want to direct this as well?
Do you want me to go first? I
Please.
guess so. Well, for me, what drew me, there were a number of things that drew it to me. One, of course, was the opportunity to work with John. We both came out of SC. We didn't know each other here, but I knew of him, and so when I got it, then the movie sort of came to me last. John Peters got the rights. John Peters brought John on, and John brought me on. Mm-hmm. So they were already in place by the time I got hired, and I just went and, for one thing, when I started researching this and I realized that this is something that is not taught in American schools, and this is not a part of history that we ever are aware of in this country, that's one thing that really drew me to it, the opportunity to shed light on something that, had no light shed on it. And also just the opportunity to work with John. And also, I had, as you said, it was my first produced film, and I just got really excited by the material and the opportunity and everything else. And let's be honest, I was starting to be successful, but I hadn't anything produced yet. So if I got a job offer, I took it. That's part of it too. So that's it. And as for what drew John, I don't know. He would have to speak to that. Maybe you could.
I think for me, it was the fourth film I think that we worked with John on, and so again, just working with John, it was a teamwork, and just really like working together with him, and really wanting to do whatever I could do to help this film or any of the projects with him, to go forward. And it's John.
Can I ask you a question, Ving? One thing I was wondering watching this time, I was looking at your horsemanship. I was like, he's actually pretty good. And most of the time you see people who haven't, I don't know if you've ridden horses before, but you'll see actors and they're kind of leaning back when they're trying to ride. And you were like upright and in command of the horse. So did you have to practice much?
Yeah, I think I practiced for about 8 weeks. Like 5 days a week. They took me someplace in Malibu, and and then at a certain point, I got so accustomed to a certain horse, and I realized that the personality of horses are different. So and it happened in film. They switched the horse on me. So I wasn't that concerned about it, but I did feel like, wow, I have a better chemistry with horse A than horse B.
Yeah, like when you're riding through the woods. I mean, you're going full bore, right? Look like it. When they're shooting at you.
My stunt man did some of that, and he was going full bore. I was chilling out. I was in the trailer. So yeah, I had a good stunt guy too, man. So it was. And he really did this stuff, I think, going through trees or what have you. I did any kind of straight riding, it was myself. But getting back to, go ahead, because I'll answer that other question.
Okay. John would always, before he ever did a film, for each film, he'd send me the script maybe a month or two before, and Rose was like, wow, this one's amazing, this is heavy. And we talked about how important this film was, and we just took it really seriously. He just wanted this to be the best film, and he felt very responsible. Like he had the weight of all the people who died in Rosewood on his shoulders, and he'd talk about that. So he's back to the word intention too. I mean, he was just determined to make this film important. He wanted everybody to see it, but he really wanted to be true to the people of Rosewood. And also, while I have this, there was one quote I came across recently from the New York Times, Stanley Crouch wrote this about Rosewood, which I just think is important. So if you don't mind, I will read it. That Rosewood is John Singleton's finest work. And then he wrote, never in the history of American film has Southern racist hysteria been shown so clearly. Color, class, and sex were woven together on a level that Faulkner would have appreciated. So I thought that quote was really...
Thank you for sharing.
Greg gets credit too for that, because I mean, the script is very powerful.
I think I remember John telling me that, you know, when he was having problems with the studio, that they said something to him like it treats the white people unfairly or makes them look bad or something, and they wanted to soften that aspect. Do you remember that, Bruce? Did they want to take some of that out?
Not particularly.
No?
In fact, I think this film showed, tried to
was
be
realistic.
pretty fair and balanced. No, I don't know. Yeah.
John had some of those conversations with me about the studio's concerned about how X demographic would view it. And I don't know who this film was made for, but I do think that, especially you actors out here, like, there's some things that how Hollywood operates as far as who you are, who they are, who they're trying to market the film to. And for me, what I liked was the fact that John never really gave in reference to my character. Like, it was important for him to even see, how many films have we seen even now where you see two black people loving each other? Something that simple. He wanted to show two black people loving each other. So some of the talks we had was, and I don't know if most of you know, like, I don't want to say the N-word, and I don't mean this in any negative sense, but John was a brother from the hood who a lot of his friends, I went to I think it was his 50th birthday party. Was he 50? Yeah, his whatever. I was at his 50th birthday party, and I do gang intervention. So at the party where Crips were there, it was like brothers, it was like brothers from the hood there, what have you. And so, in a lot of them, he put in the films, and he talked a lot about, he grew up in the Hoover neighborhood and what have you, and that's who were at his party. It wasn't a whole lot of Hollywood people. It was the average brother growing up in the street, growing up struggling, what have you. Yeah. And so for me, for him to have the courage to even present a character like some of the black men in this movie, and, who basically didn't back down, so for me, a lot of this, I felt that Hollywood would have an issue with, and I was surprised he was able to get the film done. So, God bless him.
I was going to say one thing. I don't know how John arranged this, pulled this off, but you can correct me, Bruce, but I think the train in the movie, they actually built like 3.5 miles of train. I
remember that.
They brought a steam engine down there to Florida, or was it shot in Florida?
Yeah.
They brought that down there, and like, what black man could do this back then in 1990? And back then there was no CGI like we know it today, so they had to build the houses, they had to burn them, they had to set stuff on fire. I'm sure people were in danger, but it's just makes this movie look even more amazing because everything's so real.
Well, I remember when he found the location, and he was all excited because it actually had been one of those Florida land deals that you hear about, where people were selling off swampland to unsuspecting people, and he said it's great because they went and they built all the roads, they built everything so we can get out there into the swamp, but then it's just swamp. So it's perfect for us. And that's where they built it out there. They built the entire town out there, and then they burned the entire town down. It was crazy.
Wow. I have a question for you, Mr. Rhames. I want to know what the acting process was like in this film, because there were a lot of scenes that were very intense to watch, so I'm sure they're very intense to perform. and just, you know, how did you work with Mr. Singleton to cope, you know, as a human being being placed into that situation?
Well, it really wasn't that difficult for me. First of all, John, we had a rehearsal period. And, you know, in the rehearsals, we could question and what have you. And also, my parents were sharecroppers in Orangeburg, South Carolina. As a matter of fact, and my mother just passed away at 92 about 5 months ago, but one of the things she said to me, and I had to look it up, she said she was picking cotton with Nazi prisoners. I didn't know about that. I never read about that, but if you Google it right now, in South Carolina, there were Nazi prisoners, and she said that, and when they went into town, the Nazis went to the white only, and, you know, the coloreds went to the coloreds only. So I was more so like I could relate to it, and some of the stories that my mother, you know, would tell me that was kind of hard to believe now. She said that her cousins were driving. They lived in the backwoods of South Carolina, and he had his family with him. They saw the headlights of a car coming towards them. He had his family run into the woods and hide, and he was never seen again. So I already had something in me just thinking about, you know, like, okay, what my relatives went through. And it was easy, you know, like the Stanislavski technique of acting. It was kind of easy to put myself there because I have this kind of belief that if I have DNA from my mother and father, whatever they experienced is in me in some form. Now, that's just what I believe. So things that she might have went through, I felt it was close to me. I felt like it was in me. So I was able to use that, you know, working with John. And, you know, since she's gone from the planet, what have you, I even still feel like, some people call it deja vu. I call it, if my mother was there and I have her DNA, some of me was there. You know, so I kind of like, you know, a lot of stuff happened organically for me because of that belief system.
Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Hedgepath, I'm so sorry, and Miss Banks. I have a question. So, of course, there is a lot of intricate sounds and, you know, different displays of audio within this film. I was wondering, what was the conversations like in the editing room and, you know, in the preparations for this film with John? You know, were there, like, for example, the train, the sound of the train was always present within, you know, the first part of the film. And so that came back later on in the final scene. What was, you know, some of the conversations like?
Well, you know, he talked about the organic nature of the train and how it's this, you know, living, breathing thing. So he always wanted to hear it breathing when you were near it. So we had all kinds of different types of steam. You know, all the sound you heard from the train was created. I mean, we didn't use production sound because when they record production, they're recording the actors' voices. They're trying not to record the sound of the train. That's the whole point. So we had to make all that. So, you know, when you're down with the wheels, you know, you wanted to hear the grinding of the wheels. And one of the hardest ones was when John Voight is in the cabin with the other guys. He's telling them to give it more, you know, more steam or whatever. And because a lot of that's production, right? There was, I'm sure there was some ADR, but there was, yeah.
Yes, both.
Yeah. And so, you know, we had to we had to have all kinds of different sounds going on around us, but not so much to overpower the dialogue. But we made it loud enough so that when you had production or ADR, that it helped the two blend together. And there was one scene in the movie that just killed us because it wasn't it wasn't used. There was a scene where the train is coming in and the camera's like kind of pointing at the train. It's coming in this way, and it has to come in and stop because there's some men on the tracks that stop the train. And it was the most beautiful, delicious sound, and John loved it. But you guys in the editing realized we had the train kind of stop twice, and it was a little bit too much. We wanted to keep it going, so it had to be taken out, unfortunately. And somewhere in a vault, there's some great sound for that.
It was really a great scene. And I always felt mixed about them taking out because it was very good for Ellis's character, if I remember correctly. The sheriff was going to stop the train, but then I think he had a change of conscience, right? And he let it go. But there was the issue of the film felt like it had a lot of endings, and it was just John actually agreed with it. We all talked about it, from the studio to John and Paul Hall, who wasn't on the show, but a good friend of his. All came together saying for the good of the film, it felt a little long at the end, it would be better. And I think it was the right decision, but I wish they'd put that on a DVD or somewhere.
Yeah,
It was a great scene, actually.
And one other thing I'll add is that John wanted us to really make people reach to hear the dialogue. So there's a lot of time where people are yelling and shouting, but certain words stick out. The ADR in the dialogue is placed specifically in our dialogue mixer, Bob Litt, who was one of the best in the business. It was his last film that he mixed, actually. Knew how to poke things out, and I was noticing this time for the first time there's some ADR. Like somebody's walking away and they'll say something, and he would take it and then he'd like pull it down a little bit, so you get the sense that the person is moving, as opposed to most people, they'll just put it in there and it's this thing that's sticking out. I mean, it's really done well. And one last thing I'll say is one of my favorite scenes is the sawmill scene where they come and tell James, and you almost hear no production. I mean, there's some lines in there. I don't know if
the machine's going by.
Yeah, the machine's going by, and the machine
Hitchcock.
is just and John wanted that machine to be front and center and just to be disturbing and grinding away, and because you knew what they were saying to him, so all you need to hear is a little bit of words here and there, and you got the point. And that was the brilliance of his filmmaking.
Tastefully done.
Thank you. We're going to turn it over to the audience now. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry, we have microphones.
I just got a question for Greg, right? About the kind of ending, and if you could talk a little bit about how you kind of came to that sort of an ending, because it's sort of difficult to kind of, make sense of the tragedy and everything that kind of went on, and if there was like, I don't know, a different kind of way that you might have thought to go about it, or kind of how you wrapped it all up, how you were able to come to that.
Are you talking about them getting out on the train, or?
Yeah.
I mean, well, for one thing, that actually did happen. The train thing is real, and John Wright did help arrange it, and all of that actually happened. So we always knew that was where the movie was headed. But then we also took the time, I think, after that, to sort of wrap up each little couplet, and one of the things that I don't know if you noticed this, but in the final crawl it said that there was testimony from several African Americans and one white citizen, and unfortunately he would not give us the rights to use his name, all that, but it was that Emmett character who in the 90s actually testified on behalf of the survivors. So it was really important to me to get that last beat of him leaving town and all of that. But yeah, I mean, the ending was just based on what really happened, and so we always knew we had to get there in the most dramatic fashion. And I think I don't know, you could say we overdid it a little bit with the jumping on the horses and all that stuff. I don't know, but it was grounded in what actually happened, and that was John's thing from the very beginning. Was we can be as dramatic as we want to be, but we've got to stick with the reality of what really happened in that town. And so that's what we did. And there were actually, I think he had some bigger ideas about how to sort of Hollywood this movie a little bit more. But after we met with all of the survivors and we spent days. I have stacks of cassette tapes of these interviews that we did with the survivors. And after that, I think he sort of had an epiphany about pulling it back and sort of really sticking to the reality of what happened there. We were already doing the man with no name thing, and we decided that was enough, and everything else was really grounded in reality. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did my character die historically?
Your character, I hate to tell you this, did not exist historically. Your character came from here.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was the one invention for the movie, and obviously it was the linchpin of the movie. Yeah.
Well, your character certainly existed for the audience. This is the second time we saw it when it first came out, and then seeing it now. I mean, your character was like a superhero in the sense of so solid, so grounded, and that shot where the fire is behind you and you come out of it was just phenomenal. And I've always loved you as an actor ever since, but it's just seeing it again, it all came back to me. It's just really a superhero role.
And that's what John said to me. He wanted him to be a superhero because I don't know what films were out then, but not too many with a black man as a superhero.
Right.
So he said that was something that he wanted. But I found untying myself from the horse, I felt a little about that, so.
But that's what superheroes do. They have to be super, right? It's not
Yes.
just heroic. It has to be over the top.
Yeah, and I think for me, with what was happening in it, I felt it was a different element to the film. And maybe it is that over-the-top superhero element, so. Because at first he was talking to me, I forgot what movie, I want to say it was a Clint Eastwood film, coming in riding on a horse.
Yeah.
Oh,
that one.
Yes, yes. So.
It's also like Shane and all those.
Yeah,
classic,
it's like all those classic,
Yeah.
those sort of classic
the
movies.
outside coming in. Yeah.
I also wanted to ask if anybody could talk about working with Ruthie Carter. I didn't know she did the costumes until I saw it this time, because I didn't know who she was back then. But now she's such a force.
She was a force then. I mean, she was always very involved and really creative, and had a wonderful relationship with John. I mean, John would kind of tell her what he wanted. She'd come back, and they were really always in sync. I didn't spend that much time, but we'd always go around her, office at times, and she'd show John what, costume she was working on. And I wish I could answer more, but I just know John had the utmost respect for her, and she delivered for John big time. And I think he was also impressed that she worked with Spike, I think, before that. Yeah.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Kim Nickerson. I went to HBC with Ruth Carter, and she made all of her clothes. And I come from a very prominent black family. So she comes out here to Hollywood, and I'm always out at night in Hollywood. And she has a star, okay? So I have a lot of resentment that she comes out to Hollywood, and she never looks me up. And it's just crazy. I'm writing this little letter here, and I have 46 years in Screen Actors Guild, and I'm one of the first. I did commercials, and I was on Good Times, and I'm really hurt that Ruth Carter has a star on Hollywood Boulevard. So I'm just, I'm going against what you're saying.
Why are you hurt by that?
So many years she's been here. And there are other people involved also. There's Ray Dowell. She was my roommate, and Ray refuses to call me. It's like what they did was they hooked up with Spike Lee, and they never call. They never reach out.
They're also very busy. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm busy also. I'm teaching in LA Unified, you know? So that's all I have to say.
Have you reached out to them?
Yeah, I've reached out to Ray Dowell, and Ray's doing very well. She worked at BET for a little while. Yeah. Also, casting director Robbie Reed, I would like to slam. Robbie and I went to Beverly Hills High School together, and she was like my secretary. And I was also on the reunion committee for Beverly Hills High School, and a resume floats in while I'm preparing, and I have a lot of resentment for that. I believe that Black people are family, and I believe we should stick together, and I just want to slam these people, and that's all.
Well, I will just say that Hollywood's a very out of sight, out of mind kind of place. And it's, unfortunate, but it just is the way it is because people are moving around and moving from place to place. And there are plenty of people who I've worked with. We had a great experience. I have all kinds of signs. Oh, thank you. Never heard from them again. And I don't get mad. It's just what happens, And there's sometimes some people who I know I should have done their movie and it would have been a better movie, but it didn't happen. That's just the way things are in this town sometimes.
Well, I wonder, does your resentment serve you in any positive way? No, I said, does it serve you in any positive way? I agree it doesn't. I know, but I'm asking you about you and your personal resentment. Does that serve you in any way? I know, no, does your resentment serve you in any positive way? You having I don't think it does either. So why have it?
Okay, thank you.
We had one down here, didn't we?
Hi. Hi, Bobbi, and hi, Greg. And I'm so thrilled that I came down here. I actually curated the John Singleton exhibit up at Cal State Northridge, and Bobbi and Greg came and spoke. One thing that came up then was that every few years they talk about, someone will write an article about how prophetic Boys in the Hood was and that it was ahead of its time. Now that we're here in 2022, do you feel that way about Rosewood?
Can I say something about that? Because I had a revelation, and you're going to think I'm so stupid when I say this, but, I knew that the beginning of the movie was very bucolic, but, it just really struck me being able to just watch it as like almost a first-time viewer, just how, beautiful everything is in the beginning. Everybody's getting along. All the houses look great. And to me, it's a metaphor, almost an analog of how this country has been for a number of years. And then now we're seeing the dark underside of it in some ways, and that's what the movie turns into, and you get to see some people's real nature. And I think we've been seeing some of that lately, unfortunately.
Okay, Alex, how many?
Hi, my name is Micaiah. I'm a freshman in SCA, and I just first wanted to thank you all for coming out here. It's just amazing to I just saw you on screen, and now to see you all here and knowing that you worked on this. I didn't really know what my question was gonna be, but I guess kind of piggybacking off of that. Me as a young filmmaker, I want to make films that advocate for social change, that can spark people's opinions. How do you all, what would you want younger generations watching this? This is the first time I've ever seen this movie. I didn't really know anything about it, so I was very shocked. What would be your advice to the younger generation? What do you want, the younger generation to take out of this film? And then how do you feel, just advice on moving forward as far as social change through cinema?
I'll just quickly say, John would always say to people when asked, similar questions, write from your own personal experience, write from yourself, and be open, honest, and painful, and express yourself in that way. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's, as a writer, that would be what his advice would be.
I'm piggybacking off of him. I feel like to thine own self be true. So whatever is in you now. I try to deal with some things on a spiritual level, and I don't really put myself in the hands of man. I put myself in the hands of God. So for me, what man says or feel, or if they don't produce this project or whatever, I'm not concerned about man's opinion, because I think that there's a higher source that will get that project done, etc. So I'm really, like I tell people, I'm in Hollywood, but I'm not of Hollywood. As a matter of fact, I don't really even like Hollywood.
I agree.
Yeah, and just going off the sort of write what you know thing, that I think that what that really means is to find a way to use your own unique experience to tell stories that aren't even necessarily about yourself or your world or your life. I mean, look at me. I wrote this movie. This certainly wasn't my experience, but I've had experiences that I could tap into. And I think that's when you say when someone says write what you know, it doesn't mean the only thing you can write is a story about a freshman at USC but if you have had emotional experiences with your parents or things that have happened, people you've lost or whatever, you can take those experiences and write about them in any scenario, in any setting, in any story you want to tell. But the emotional core of it will be true because it's coming from something that you actually know, and I think that's the takeaway of the write what you know thing. It's not, I can only write movies about white guys that grew up in Hawaii. That's not what that means. It means write the emotional stuff that you know, and you can tell any story you want if you can do that. So.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
While they're handing the mic, I'll also just say, as a technical person, I'll just say that also, you just have to do the best job you can possibly do. And if somebody tells you you can't do that, just ignore it. Let them think they're getting their way, but you may have to, work late hours, into the wee hours, work weekends on your own time just to get the job done right, but get the job done right.
I have a question for Greg. The story has a lot of rich storylines. And I was wondering, when you were writing or outlining this, was it done, were the storylines written like individually, or was it done like consecutively? Like, because there's so many storylines with so many different reversals. So did you write it straight through, or did you write like the individual storylines and then?
I'm one of those writers that, and I'm going to confess something here, that after I went to SC and graduated, I went to the UCLA screenwriting program, where they say the first day you get there, they say, we're going to teach you three things here: structure, structure, and structure, right? So I spend a great deal of time. If it takes me 12 weeks to write a first draft of a script, 7 of those weeks will be with index cards and figuring out how everything fits together and all that kind of stuff. I'm really, really heavily, I lean on that stuff. So I think, to answer your question in a real sort of technical way, I think we knew all the stories we wanted to tell, and I kind of laid them all out individually and then spent time figuring out how they snake together to sort of drive the narrative forward in the best possible way. So the answer is yes and yes. Yes, I figured everything out individually, and yes, I put them all together and moved forward from the beginning to the end. But I spent a lot of time figuring out, we want to go from this scene to that scene. We need to have a spot here for people to catch their breath a little bit, so we're going to do this right after we do that, and then we can slide into that. And then, of course, he changes it all around anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it's I'm kidding. Just a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that's my process, and everybody's process is different, I guess. But I like to have a really strong structure in place before I start to write, and then the writing sort of is the easy part. That's the work. That's the hard work for me, and then the writing is the fun part, And that's because I know where I'm going all the time. So I hope that answers your question.
Hi, I'm Chloe Eloise. Sorry, I'm right here. I'm a freshman here at SEA 2. I just had a question for Mr. Rhames. I know you mentioned before about the environment that Mr. Singleton created on set. And I wanted to ask specifically in this context with dealing with this like very racially sensitive content. As an aspiring director myself, how did Mr. Singleton navigate this content, and how, especially this like the emotional level on set, how did he handle that, and how did he deal with the actors to ensure that everyone was coping healthily?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I did, and I didn't invite Jon Voight. I had a party for black people only while we were filming, and at that party, I'll say in general, we have a language as black people where some other cultures don't understand it. And we can relate to each other in a way that some other cultures may not understand it, just like I may not understand another culture's way of communicating. But we talked about some of the things that had happened in America with black folks. Now, John was at the party. So, and then in the rehearsal period, we really got into some things that I kind of want to say we kind of were not concerned with how the Caucasian actors dealt with it, felt about it, or what have you. We didn't really concern ourselves with that. And, I was pretty close to Jon Voight, but I realized he got into a big argument one time. I forgot with what actor, but they got into a kind of disagreement. It might have been who was Okuswa's dad in the movie? Well,
Yeah,
Okuswa. Well, Jon Voight looked like sleeping with.
Wasn't that Benjamin? Yeah, wasn't that Paul
That's
Benjamin?
Paul Benjamin.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah. Him and Paul Benjamin got into something over. Really, from looking at it as how a black father would deal with a situation, and Jon Voight had a different take on it, So, but I kind of accepted it. Let's say there's no right or wrong. You have your opinion, I have mine, what have you. So I think there was a structured freedom where we could agree to disagree. We could debate each other about whatever. So for me, that kind of a freedom to say what you want to say and not necessarily sugarcoat it. And if so-and-so didn't understand it or what have you, it didn't matter. I spoke my truth, they can speak their truth, and we move on. So I think it was also kind of part of the creative process where, how many places can you totally be yourself and say what you want to say? Let's say Donald Trump does. He says what's on his mind, and you deal with it. So we kind of built that kind of creative environment, and thinking about it like, well, I've never done another film like this, but it was very freeing and very honest, even to hear some people say some things that I just realized that you can get a PhD and not take one African American history class. So what do you really know about me? What you read in the papers, stereotypes you see on the news, what have you. So you don't really learn my culture, but I have to learn your culture, you know? And so for me, it was almost like, okay, if I know how you feel about myself, my people in general, whatever, but I'm learning your culture, so I know how better to deal with you than you know how to deal with me. You guys know the poem, We Wear the Mask? Yeah, you see? So.
Thank you.
Did you and John ever talk politics?
Yes.
Because I know he's very conservative, right? Was he that way then?
He wasn't conservative, well.
John Voight.
John Voight.
Oh,
Oh, no,
John
John Voight.
John Voight. Okay.
Speaking
Okay.
of Trump.
A little, but when I realized that we have opposing views on damn near everything, I don't waste my time talking to that person. You know, I'm like, hey, okay, that's what you believe, fine, but I'm not going to debate you. I'm not going to try to get you to believe my perspective, because I think there are some things, and maybe you guys can talk about it, where I think we're more similar than different. But what happens in society that makes us different? So I'm saying, like, is it really the person, or is it the society influence on the person? You know, so I pretty much believe it's society's influence in general. So if you had a different societal experience, would you think differently? Would you feel differently about a subject? Like, as I said earlier, like, if you just took one African American class, could that change you? Or one class about, you know, gay people, or you know, but in general, in this country, when I was growing up anyway, well, we still have, what, Black History Month? Well, what are we learning all the other months? So some things are just so blatant that, you know, it's almost like, okay, I understand why my Caucasian brother doesn't understand me. He probably doesn't have many black friends. He hasn't spent time with many black people. He hasn't studied anything school-wise about black people. So, you know, and even for me as a black man, I came up in, let's say, I learned more about of course, Martin Luther King, Booker T. Washington. I didn't really learn about Frederick Douglass, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey. I didn't learn about those guys, Malcolm X even, you know. So I learned more about, I mean this in a respectful way, you guys got to give me a word for ex-Negroes. Yes, let's say the more palatable Negroes to America. You know, so and John allowed us to be, you know, not palatable. So, you know, and I think it was respected, like between us as actors, as people, because we did have a lot of talks about racial differences. You know, and even then we had a lot of talks about, you know, black men and Caucasian women. Because, you know, the girl said a black guy raped her or whatever, you know, so we had those kind of talks, and we had talks of, like we had some real talks about stuff in life that are not comfortable in general to talk about, or not to talk about with other races of people. You know, the brothers can sit down and talk about but, you know, what, you know, some people who may not have as much in common, it started out a little sensitive, but then it didn't take too long for that sensitivity to go away, and we just talk with each other as men and women.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists for coming out tonight. Don't forget to catch us at Shaft. We're going to be ending questions for tonight. We'll be premiering Shaft at the end of the month. Please RSVP, and have a great night.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you.